What's going on, you guys? Let's talk about the Need for Speed franchise for a second. So recently, I was between games, and I turned to my collection in search of something new to play, and discovered, or decided to myself that I really wanted to spend some quality time with a different genre. Not something easier per se, but something more simplistic, more straightforward, where I could just turn my brain off and go, which is how we ended up here. Now, the PS1 entries into this franchise are getting their own video because logically I didn't think throwing them in the ring against some of the more modern installments would be the fairest thing in the world to do. So they're getting their own video. They're getting their own chance to shine. Before we get into it, though, I do have a little bit of a disclaimer that I have not beaten a single game on this list. I could say it's because I claim to be no master of the PS1 controls. I could say it's because my eyesight, while not being bad, is certainly not what I needed it to be in order to successfully play some of these older games. But I do believe that there is a profound difference in just being hung up with a game, struggling with a particular portion in a game, and just plain and genuinely lacking the skill to be able to progress with a game in any sort of fashion whatsoever. With that being said, I want you to know that I do fully intend to someday revisit these games, to sit down with them and hopefully develop the skills necessary to be able to play these games and experience them and enjoy them. The deterrent that I had to doing that right now is that this is a beefy franchise. There are so many games that I need to cover, and just the project of any sort of ranking of this series is a feat unto itself, and it's much too early for me to be having the sort of issues that I had. So if I had any hope, any prayer of finishing this project in a timely manner, I needed to cut some corners. So my compromise would be to spend, I don't know, say an hour, maybe 2 hours with each game, which was enough time, I think, to get a feel for them, to understand how they worked, and see really what they were bringing to the table, and hopefully form some sort of an opinion on each one before we gradually move on to the more modern games that we're all familiar with. Which brings us finally to the ranking itself. As always, starting from the worst and working our way up, we have the original Need for Speed. Now, it's not on the bottom of this list because it's a bad game by any means. I don't think that. I think the game is fine. Absolutely nothing wrong with it. The thing for me about the original game is that it's a little bit too simulation-y for me, if that makes sense. It's a lot like what you would find in a Gran Turismo or something like that, which I am, again, completely fine with. I do enjoy games like that, but there's a time and place. I think I have to be in a very particular mindset, very particular mood to uh, enjoy a racing game like that. And obviously, when I started this project, I may not have been, because this was my first time playing any of these, so I really didn't know what I was getting into or what to expect. Um, but I can say that is the one and only reason that the original Need for Speed is on the bottom of this list. Above that, we have Need for Speed 3 Hot Pursuit, which is essentially just Need for Speed 2 with cops, which we will get into momentarily. This is a game that I debated a lot with myself on, because, quite frankly, I think it deserves that worst spot. And I got very swip-swappy on it. Even before turning the camera on to make this video, I was still trying to decide if it was going to be the worst or not. What saved it for me, I think, is that this game at least tries to be fun, tries to do some entertaining things, but I really think the deal breaker is that the cops, rather than having them add to the overall experience of the game, make the game more intense, more random, more entertaining, they really just served as a huge, resounding hindrance. Especially with the issues that I was having through all of these games, all I wanted to do was race. All I wanted to do was figure out how to succeed at it. And it was like every time I made a little bit of progress, there was just a cop there to slam into me, to force me off the road, to shout the same lines at me over and over and over again. And just, they made an already difficult situation that much more infuriating because I couldn't get anywhere. And so yeah, maybe my opinion on this would change if I, had those skills to actually play the game properly. But, I was basically starting from the ground up with all of these, and I think dealing with the cops and kind of what they do throughout your races, I think was a difficulty spike that I in no way, shape, or form was prepared for. So that's why it's there. Above that, though, we have the aforementioned Need for Speed 2, which I did thoroughly enjoy. This game was definitely one of my favorites. When you compare it to its predecessor, the differences are night and day. I would actually compare this to something in the vein of maybe a cruisin' type game, not so much in track design or environmentally, but it is very fast. It's very snappy. It's definitely wild, definitely gets off the rails, and is a lot more Arcadian feel. It's definitely one that you can just pick up and play. I think it definitely would be a pretty fun playthrough with some friends if you got them, and that sort of thing. But I just genuinely enjoyed this and genuinely had fun with it. And I guess out of all of these, it definitely would be one that I would just um, pick up and play randomly and definitely revisit. In second place here, we have Need for Speed Porsche Unleashed, which is a really cool game in concept, where you the premise of the game is to relive the history of Porsche through the decades, through all the different, or at least a vast majority of the models of their vehicles year by year. The primary issue that I felt with this game in the little bit that I played is that it just doesn't feel like a Need for Speed game compared to the rest of the series. This just kind of felt like an oddball. I would definitely say it feels less like a Need for Speed game and more like, you know, something you would find in the Ford racing franchise, or a Corvette game or a Mustang game. Any of the racing games that have the primary focus of a particular automotive company, through the years, through, you know, the ups and downs, because there are games like that, and this genuinely feels like it belongs in that category. It just happens to have a Need for Speed name on it, which kind of makes me curious to know how this game came to be. I didn't really research it. I don't know anything about it. I would assume, you know, a partnership was formed between the two because Need for Speed was popular at the time, so they were just like, hey, let's do this. Let's do something with Porsche, and that's the game we got. Like I said, absolutely phenomenal game. Love the concept. It just doesn't really feel... There's other racing games that I would be like, oh, this is exactly what they're going for. But it is technically a Need for Speed game, which feels very weird to me personally. Maybe y'all don't feel the same way, but I definitely was like, I don't know if I buy into this being a Need for Speed game. This could be its own game of just like, hey, here's a Porsche company, and just Porsches all over the place. Because they and games like that definitely have their fan base. I belong to them, but it, like I said, it just doesn't feel like it should be a Need for Speed game. And I definitely would argue that maybe it kind of sort of doesn't belong in the series, but that's just me. Which leaves the number one spot and my personal favorite game of the PS1 selection in the Need for Speed series, which would be Need for Speed High Stakes. Why? Because this one kinda is the closest thing, at least on the PS1, that we get to the Need for Speed that we would come to know and love. This is the Need for Speed that feels the most street racy, I guess. It's a game where you buy your way into tournaments. You pay to customize your vehicle. In no means do I think that the customization is what it is today or very in depth. I definitely don't remember it being that way, but I did see very much this gameplay loop of spending money to make money, which none of the other games seem to have. You know, like I said, they're either very simulation-esque, where it's just like, hey, get in your car and drive, or they're definitely more fast-paced and arcadey, not really putting a focus on money management, customization, upgrading, anything like that. Um, so so yeah, there you have it. There's our ranking of the PS1 Need for Speed games, short, sweet, and to the point. Um, I can't necessarily tell you when the other parts will be released to the channel. They definitely got put on the back burner in favor for other content and other creative endeavors, kind of lost in the shuffle. I can guarantee that to you though that they will come. I will finish this. It's just a question of when. I can also tell you that I am thus far up to uh, Underground 2, I think is where I left off before getting sidetracked and leaving it sit. But my Instagram is where I posted pictures of the car I used to beat the original Underground game. I imagine that that'll probably be something that I do as I progress through the series, taking pictures of all the vehicles that I use and things. So if you're at all interested in the series and what the countdown looks like moving forward, definitely keep an eye on my Instagram. If you see pictures of vehicles and me talking about the Need for Speed franchise, that's kind of going to be your sign that I've come back to it and we're picking up where we left off. But until then, guys, we'll see you in the next video.